August 16, 1944. Over Leipzig, B-17 crews watched in disbelief as a rocket-powered aircraft vaulted vertically through their formation at 3,000 feet per minute, showing no propeller, no engine noise, and vanishing at speeds Allied intelligence claimed were physically impossible. This was Hitler's rocket fighter, the Me-163 Komet, dismissed as Nazi propaganda by experts back home, but now rewriting the limits of air combat in a single chilling encounter. If Allied pilots couldn't even track it, how could they hope to stop it? The truth behind this so-called impossible weapon was far more alarming, and the consequences would forever haunt military intelligence. What happened in these few seconds would trigger an urgent crisis nobody was prepared for. Radio static crackled in the headset as Captain Charles Lenfest scanned the sky east of Leipzig. At 25,000 feet, the formation held steady, engines droning, guns at the ready. Then a voice broke through. "Contrails, hired at 6 o'clock!" Lenfest's head snapped back. Two shapes, stubby and swept, tore down from above. No propellers, no familiar silhouette. They moved with a purpose, closing the distance in seconds. Colonel Avelin Tacon, leading the escort, watched as the unknown aircraft banked sharply, holding tight formation even as they dove. He estimated their speed at well over 500 miles per hour. The Mustangs tried to turn, but the rocket fighters were already there, slicing through the bomber's altitude in a near-vertical climb. The cockpit filled with the shriek of wind and the faint, unnatural howl of rocket combustion. From the waist gun of a B-17, a gunner tried to track the blur, too fast, gone before the turret could swing. In the chaos, gunners shouted for bearings, but the rocket fighters vanished, streaking upward, contrails twisting behind them like smoke from artillery shells. For a moment, the formation was stunned into silence. Pilots strained for another glimpse, searching for any sign of a turning fight, but the sky had closed again, empty except for the fading trails. Tacon's logbook recorded the encounter. Two single-seaters, no visible engines, climbing almost straight up, accelerating away from the P-51s as if gravity no longer applied. The attack had lasted less than 20 seconds. No one could say for certain if a shot had been fired. The only evidence was the memory of a shape rocketing skyward and the uneasy realization that nothing in Allied service could match it. Back on the intercom, Lenfest's voice was tight. "They're above us again. I can't get a bead." The ground seemed impossibly distant. The sky impossibly wide. For the first time, seasoned airmen found themselves outflown, outpaced, and left with questions their own commanders could not answer. The bombers pressed on, shaken. In the debriefing tent, Hand sketched the impossible, a fighter that climbed like a shell, struck without warning and left only vapor in its wake. The air war had changed in a single pass, and every man aboard those bombers knew it. At RAF Fighter Command, the first written reports trickled in from the continent, sketches of an aircraft with no propeller, no visible engine, and a climb rate that defied established aerodynamics. The initial assessment landed on Major Thompson's desk with a pile of post-mission debriefs. He read the claims in silence. A fighter, smaller than a Spitfire, observed ascending through bomber formations at speeds reported above 500 miles per hour. The official memo, filed under AIR 22, carried a single handwritten note: aerodynamically impossible. Thompson's own summary, destined for Air Ministry distribution, drew on the language of caution. Eyewitness accounts were flagged as likely misidentification of glider prototypes. The technical section, referencing known German glider programs, suggested the enemy had simply adapted high-performance sailplanes for harassment roles. He highlighted the lack of exhaust signature and the absence of propeller blur in gun camera footage. The report concluded, "No credible evidence of rocket propulsion. Further investigation required." Across the channel, USAAF intelligence at Wright Field mirrored the skepticism. Reports from 8th Air Force included diagrams of the bat-like shape, annotated with question marks and the phrase "probably 163 unconfirmed." Analysts cited the physical limits of piston engines and the structural stresses of high-speed flight. One T-Series summary dismissed the possibility outright. Speeds in excess of 600 miles per hour not attainable by known German technology. Thompson faced a quiet professional hazard. To endorse such claims without hard evidence risked ridicule within the analyst corps. The chain of command expected technical certainty, not speculation. The prevailing wisdom held that German innovation could not leapfrog Allied progress so dramatically. Dissenting voices were muted in official memoranda, replaced by cautious language and requests for additional photographic proof. In the calm of the intelligence office, the chaos and confusion from the Leipzig skies seemed distant, almost abstract. The men at their desks trusted in mathematics and metallurgical tables, not the frantic radio calls from bomber crews. The possibility that the enemy had achieved what Allied engineers deemed impossible was quietly set aside, filed under further review. On paper, the threat remained theoretical, a puzzle for another day. Deep inside the workshop at Clem, the German engineering team gathered around a set of battered blueprints and glass flasks. On the workbench, a small brass pump hissed as a liquid flowed through its veins. The solution inside was T-Stoff, concentrated hydrogen peroxide, stabilized and stored in aluminum tanks. Nearby, a separate line carried C-Stoff, an equally volatile brew of methanol, hydrazine hydrate and water. These two liquids, kept apart by meters of pipe and strict protocol, were the heart of the Me 163's propulsion. When the pilot advanced the throttle, both fuels surged toward the Walter HWK 109-509 rocket engine. The chemistry was immediate and unforgiving. T-Stoff and C-Stoff met inside the reaction chamber, igniting in a hypergolic flash. There was no spark plug, no delay. The result? A torrent of superheated steam and gas, forcing its way through the tailpipe at nearly 3,800 pounds of thrust. The engine screamed to life, propelling the aircraft forward with a violence that left even seasoned mechanics uneasy. The numbers were staggering for their time. The Me 163 could accelerate from standstill to over 500 miles per hour in seconds, climbing skyward at rates exceeding 3,000 feet per minute. But this power came at a cost. The rocket's appetite for fuel was insatiable. At full thrust, the HWK 109-509 would drain its tanks in just 8 minutes. Pilots watched the fuel gauge drop as the horizon tilted, knowing every second of burn meant less time to attack and less margin for error on the return glide. Engineers debated every component. The pump system, driven by its own steam turbine, had to withstand pressures far beyond those of piston engines. Seals and gaskets, exposed to both oxidizer and fuel, failed often. A stray drop of T-Stoff on the wrong surface could trigger a reaction hot enough to burn through metal. The ground crews wore rubberized suits and goggles, moving with deliberate caution as they filled the tanks. Even with these precautions, accidents were frequent. The chemical reaction that powered the Me 163 was as dangerous on the ground as it was in the air. The Walter engine's dual-chamber design offered pilots some measure of control. The main chamber provided raw power for takeoff and intercept. A smaller cruise chamber, the Marschofen, could be engaged for level flight, stretching endurance by a few precious minutes. In theory, this allowed for tactical flexibility. In practice, the difference was measured in heartbeats. Every sortie was a race against the clock, with the pilot balancing thrust, altitude and fuel in a dance that left no room for hesitation. The German engineers knew the trade-offs. They had built an aircraft that could outperform anything in the sky, at least for 8 minutes. Beyond that, the Me 163 was a glider, its tanks empty and its fate in the hands of gravity. The chemistry that made the rocket fighter possible defined its limits as surely as it powered its ascent. December 30th and 43. The air at Brandis is brittle with cold as Joseph Poes, Po-H, prepares for takeoff. He's no novice, 43 victories on the Eastern Front and Knight's Cross at his collar, now risking his life in the cockpit of a machine that even its builders regard with suspicion. The Me 163, a V8, sits on its dolly, tanks filled with T-Stoff and C-Stoff, the volatile chemicals that promise 8 minutes of flight and threaten instant oblivion. Poes checks the dials, signals the ground crew, and advances the throttle. The rocket lights with a banshee wail, propelling the aircraft forward in a surge of steam and violence. But as the Komet lifts, the takeoff dolly releases a fraction too early. Instead of tumbling harmlessly aside, it bounces high off the frozen runway and slams into the belly of the aircraft. There's a muffled thud, a jolt through the airframe. Inside, a T-Stoff fuel line ruptures, a clear, lethal cascade soaking the cockpit floor. The engine cuts out. Pose, trained for crisis, dumps the remaining fuel and turns the powerless glider back toward the field. He lines up for a dead-stick landing. The Comet's glide is true, but a radio tower looms ahead. There's no time, no power, only momentum and instinct. The wingtip clips the mast. The aircraft pivots, cartwheels, and comes to rest inverted, a crumpled shell. The silence is broken by the hiss of leaking oxidizer, The acrid sting of chemicals, fire crews race across the field, foam cannons ready, but the damage is done. Major Wolfgang Spate, both commander and friend, arrives at the scene. He pushes past the rescue men through the chemical mist and the foam. The cockpit is a ruin. Poe's legs protrude from the twisted frame, but the rest is unrecognisable. T-Stoff has done its work, his right arm is gone. Where flesh should be, there is only a gelatinous residue. The acid-proof suit, shredded in the crash, offered no protection. Spate orders everyone away but the recovery team. He hopes his friend was unconscious before the chemical burns began. The official report is clinical: premature dolly release, impact with the underbelly, rupture of the oxidizer line, forced landing attempt, fatal chemical exposure. But the memory lingers, of a man dissolved by his own aircraft, of a risk accepted in the name of progress. Spate, shaken, writes later that the Me-163 demanded more from its pilots than any enemy ever could. Poe's death is not a battlefield loss, but a warning etched in peroxide and pain, a reminder that in the race for speed, the greatest danger sometimes comes from within. Typed pages and carbon copies filled Thompson's desk, each carrying the cautious language of officialdom. The latest RAF memo, AIR 22/471, circled the same conclusion as before: observed performance not consistent with known German technical capability. In the margin, a blue pencil cut through the more alarming claims. Climb rates above 3,000 feet per minute, unverifiable. Diagrams from 8th Air Force intelligence, annotated with question marks and the phrase probable Me-163 unconfirmed, landed in the T-Series file at Wright Field. The technical section cited stress limits on airframes and the absence of exhaust flash and gun camera reels. One summary, stamped September 1944, read simply, "Speeds in excess of 450 miles per hour not attainable with current German metallurgy." Requests for clarification bounced between London and Dayton. The Air Ministry's R&D division flagged the reports as likely confusion with glider prototypes. USAAF analysts, wary of fueling panic, echoed the skepticism. No credible evidence of rocket propulsion, the file noted. Each new debrief, whether from a shaken B-17 crew or a P-51 pilot, was filtered through the same institutional sieve. Claims that did not fit the established tables were set aside for further review. Thompson's own summary, destined for circulation, walked a careful line. He referenced the lack of propeller blur, the missing engine noise, the absence of visible exhaust. Each point supported the standing theory: high-performance gliders, not rocket-propelled fighters. The final paragraph requested photographic proof before any adjustment to the official threat profile. In the intelligence office, the world of frantic radio calls and vanished contrails was reduced to a stack of memos, each more cautious than the last. The paper wall grew thicker with every report, holding back the possibility that the enemy had already crossed the line between the possible and the impossible. At Peenemünde, the logbooks recorded a number that seemed to defy belief. On October 2nd, 1941, Heini Dittmar climbed into the cockpit of the Me-163 AV-4, closed the canopy, and signalled for clearance. The runway stretched ahead, but the real test would come above, where no Allied eyes could follow. The rocket engine ignited with a shriek, catapulting the small aircraft across the field and up into the northern ski. Dittmar levelled out over the Baltic, his hand steady on the controls as the Komet surged past every known speed barrier. Precision theodolites tracked his path. Over a measured 3-kilometre course, the dials confirmed what the stopwatch could barely keep up with: 1,003 kilometres per hour, 623 miles per hour, sustained in level flight. Inside the hangar, Alexander Lippisch and his team pored over the data. The numbers were checked, recalculated and checked again. No piston engine, no turbojet, nothing in Allied or Axis service could match it. Dittmar emerged from the cockpit, face pale, sweat still beading along his brow. The aircraft's skin bore the strain, but the pilot carried the knowledge. Germany had touched a new frontier. The achievement remained locked behind barbed wire and secrecy orders. Peenemunde's logs listed the date, the speed and the pilot's name, but the outside world would not see the evidence for years to come. For the Allies, the gap was absolute. Intelligence files speculated about gliders and experimental jets, but no report matched the reality hidden behind the wire at Peenemünde. The Comet's record was not propaganda, it was proof, measured and archived, of a weapon whose performance was beyond the reach of conventional analysis. Dittmar's flight was not a rumour or a boast, but a secret triumph, sealed in the ledgers and the memories of those who witnessed it. The need for post-war verification would become urgent only when the Comet's impossible speeds were finally revealed to the world. At Farnborough, Captain Eric Brown settled into the cockpit of the captured Me-163. The ground crew signalled, the rocket engine shrieked, and the aircraft surged forward. Brown's notes recorded the climb, 0 to 30,000 feet in just under 3 minutes. The pressure pinned him to the seat, instruments blurring as the altimeter spun. No piston engine, no jet. Nothing in Allied service could touch this rate of ascent. Brown described the sensation as riding a shell, acceleration relentless, the horizon falling away. His test log, filed with the Royal Aircraft Establishment, confirmed what Allied intelligence had dismissed as fantasy. The Comet's performance was not propaganda. It was real, measured and terrifying. Brown's validation left no room for doubt. The numbers matched German claims, a climb that rewrote the rules of aerial combat, a speed that left even the most advanced Allied fighters behind. For the first time, the impossible had been proven possible. 9 confirmed kills, 14 aircraft lost. For every bomber struck from the sky, more Comets failed to return, claimed by enemy Gustig, enemy guns, fuel starvation, or their own chemical fury. Each mission lasted 8 minutes, a sprint from takeoff to exhaustion. At Brandis, pilots waited for the order, knowing the odds. In March 1945, a memo from Hitler's headquarters arrived. Ramming attacks authorized rocket fighters to be used as expendable weapons against Allied bombers. JG-400 pilots recorded their doubts, but the directive stood. An unnamed Allied analyst reviewing the final reports wrote, "We simply didn't believe the numbers. No aircraft could fly like that." The gap between innovation and outcome was impossible to ignore. The Comet had redefined what was possible and what was futile. In TOF 4, the Messerschmitt Me 163 set an official speed record of 623 miles per hour, a figure Allied analysts dismissed as propaganda until post-war test flights confirmed its reality. The documentary has revealed how frontline pilots reported rocket fighters climbing at over 3,000 feet per minute, while intelligence officers labelled such feats aerodynamically impossible in period memos. Documents show more Me-163 pilots died from fuel hazards and landing accidents than from enemy fire, with only 9 Allied bombers downed, but 14 Comets lost in combat. Hitler's directive for suicide ramming missions, preserved in captured orders, underscores the desperation behind this technology. To this day, some wartime intelligence files remain partially classified, and the full extent of German late-war rocket programs is still debated by historians. The Me-163 stands as evidence that technological breakthroughs can outpace doctrine and imagination, forcing even the most experienced adversaries to confront the limits of their knowledge.